A bright young teenager named Jason Evans is about to face an event that will change his life and the lives of those around him. What starts as a routine drive with his beloved grandmother turns into a nightmare when Jason is mistaken for a robbery suspect and is unjustly arrested. His quiet dignity in the face of this injustice sets off a chain of events that leads to a dramatic and unexpected response from the community and beyond. But what was it about this seemingly ordinary day that prompted such a significant reaction? Stick around to find out. But before we get started, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you're moved by this story of resilience and justice, don't forget to subscribe. The sun peeked through the curtains of Jason's bedroom, casting a warm glow across his face. He stirred, slowly opening his eyes to the new day. As consciousness crept in, a smile spread across his face. Today was special. Today, he was going on a trip with his grandmother. Jason, a 16-year-old African-American teenager, lived in the small, tight-knit suburban community of Maplewood. It was a place where everyone knew their neighbors, where block parties were a summer staple, and where kids still played outside until the streetlights came on. In this cozy corner of the world, Jason had grown up surrounded by love and support. He rolled out of bed, his feet hitting the cool hardwood floor. Stretching, he caught sight of himself in the mirror. Tall for his age, with a lean build and warm brown eyes, Jason had an easy smile that seemed to light up any room he entered. His friends often joked that he could charm his way out of any situation, but the truth was, Jason rarely needed to. He was, by nature, an honest and respectful young man. As he got dressed, Jason's eyes fell on the framed photo on his nightstand. It was a picture of him and his grandmother, Mrs. Evans, taken at his last birthday party. Despite the stark contrast in their skin tones, Jason's deep ebony next to Mrs. Evans' fair complexion, their matching smiles told a story of love that transcended color. Mrs. Evans wasn't Jason's biological grandmother. She had been his father's foster parent for years before officially adopting him. But to Jason, she was simply Grandma, the woman who baked the best chocolate chip cookies in the world, who always had a funny story to share, and who loved him unconditionally. Dressed and ready, Jason bounded down the stairs, the smell of bacon and coffee guiding him to the kitchen. There, he found his parents and grandmother already gathered around the table. "Good morning, sleepyhead," his mother teased, ruffling his hair as he passed. "Morning, Mom," Jason replied, planting a quick kiss on her cheek before turning to his grandmother. "Morning, Grandma. Ready for our big adventure today?" Mrs. Evans' eyes twinkled with excitement. "You bet I am, sweetheart. But first, sit down and eat your breakfast. Can't have you fainting at the wheel now, can we?" Jason's father looked up from his newspaper, a mock stern expression on his face. "Now, son, remember what we talked about. Driving is a big responsibility. You've got precious cargo with you today." "I know, Dad," Jason said, his voice taking on a serious tone. "I'll be extra careful, I promise." As they ate breakfast, the family chatted about the day ahead. Jason and Mrs. Evans had planned a trip to the nearby city of Millbrook for some shopping and lunch. It was about an hour's drive, perfect for Jason to practice his newly acquired driving skills. Just 3 weeks ago, Jason had passed his learner's permit test with flying colors. He'd been studying for months, determined to ace the exam on his first try. When he'd walked out of the DMV, permit in hand, he'd felt on top of the world. And no one had been prouder than Mrs. Evans. "My grandson, the driver," she'd said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your grandfather would have been so proud." Now, as they finished their breakfast, "Well," she said, pushing back from the table, "shall we get this show on the road?" Jason's heart leapt with excitement. He'd been looking forward to this day all week. Not just because of the trip itself, but because of the opportunity to drive with his grandmother. There was something special about sharing this milestone with her. As they headed out to the car, Jason's mother called out, "Drive safe, you too. And don't let Grandma talk you into any drag racing, Jason." They all laughed, the sound of their mirth echoing in the quiet morning air. It was a perfect day for a drive. Clear skies, a gentle breeze, and the promise of adventure ahead. Jason slid into the driver's seat of his mother's sedan, taking a moment to adjust the mirrors and seat. Mrs. Evans settled in beside him, her purse tucked neatly at her feet. "All set, Grandma?" Jason asked, his hand hovering over the ignition. Mrs. Evans reached over and gave his hand a squeeze. All set, sweetheart. Let's hit the road. With a turn of the key, the engine purred to life. Jason took a deep breath, put the car in drive, and slowly pulled out of the driveway. They were off. As they drove through the familiar streets of Maplewood, Jason felt a sense of pride wash over him. Here he was behind the wheel, navigating the roads he'd known all his life. But this time, he wasn't just a passenger. He was in control. Mrs. Evans seemed to sense his excitement. "You're doing great, Jason," she said, her voice warm with encouragement. "Your grandfather would be so proud to see you now." Jason smiled, his eyes never leaving the road. "Thanks, Grandma. I wish I could have known him." "Oh, he would have adored you," Mrs. Evans said, her voice taking on a wistful tone. "He always said that family isn't about blood, it's about love. And he would have loved you something fierce." As they drove, Mrs. Evans regaled Jason with stories of his grandfather, tales of his kindness, his sense of humor, and his unwavering belief in the goodness of people. Jason listened intently, soaking up every word. These stories were like pieces of a puzzle, helping him build a picture of the man he'd never had the chance to meet. They passed by the local high school, where Jason was known as one of the brightest students in his class. His teachers often praised his intelligence and his eagerness to learn. But what truly set Jason apart was his kindness. He was the type of kid who would stay after class to help a struggling classmate or volunteer to show a new student around. "You know," Mrs. Evans said as they passed the school, "I ran into Mrs. Thompson at the grocery store the other day. She couldn't stop singing your praises." Jason felt a blush creep up his neck. Mrs. Thompson was his English teacher and one of the toughest graders in the school. "Really? What did she say?" "Oh, just that you're one of the most promising students she's ever had," Mrs. Evans said casually, but Jason could hear the pride in her voice. "She said your last essay on To Kill a Mockingbird was college-level work." Jason's blush deepened. He worked hard on that essay, staying up late to perfect every paragraph. To hear that Mrs. Thompson had liked it meant more to him than he could express. As they drove through the center of town, they passed by the community center where Jason volunteered on weekends. He taught basic computer skills to seniors, helping them navigate the internet and stay connected with far-flung family members. "Remember to slow down a bit here, honey," Mrs. Evans reminded gently as they approached a school zone. "There's always a police officer around this corner." Jason eased off the accelerator, bringing the car to the posted speed limit. As they rounded the corner, sure enough, there was a police cruiser parked on the side of the road. The officer inside gave them a friendly wave as they passed. "Good eye, Grandma," Jason said, impressed by her observation skills. Mrs. Evans chuckled. "When you get to be my age, you notice these things. Plus, I've been driving these roads for longer than you've been alive." As they left the familiar confines of Maplewood behind and merged onto the highway, Jason felt a thrill of excitement. This was new territory for him as a driver. The road stretched out before them, a ribbon of possibility. "So, Grandma," Jason said, keeping his eyes on the road but unable to contain his curiosity, "what's the plan for today? You said something about shopping." Mrs. Evans nodded, a mischievous glint in her eye. "That's right. I thought we might do a little early Christmas shopping. And before you ask, no, I won't tell you what I'm getting you." Jason laughed. "Ah, come on, Grandma. Not even a hint." "Not a chance, young man," Mrs. Evans said firmly, but her eyes were twinkling. "A surprise is a surprise. But I will say this, it's something you've been wanting for a while." Jason's mind raced with possibilities. A new video game? That jacket he'd been eyeing? Or maybe... But no, it couldn't be. He pushed the thought aside, focusing back on the road. As they drove, the conversation flowed easily between them. They talked about Jason's plans for college. He was hoping to study engineering at the state university, and Mrs. Evans' latest adventures in her book club. "You wouldn't believe the debate we had over The Great Gatsby last week," Mrs. Evans said, shaking her head. "I thought poor Mrs. Higgins was going to have an aneurysm defending Daisy's character." Jason chuckled, imagining the scene. His grandmother's book club meetings were legendary for their passionate discussions. "And let me guess, you were Team Gatsby all the way?" "You know me too well, dear," Mrs. Evans said with a laugh. There's something to be said for a man who never gives up on his dreams. As they neared the outskirts of Millbrook, Jason felt a surge of pride. He'd made it all the way here, navigating busy highways and tricky intersections, all without a hitch. He glanced over at his grandmother, who was looking out the window with a contented smile on her face. "Penny for your thoughts, Grandma?" he asked. Mrs. Evans turned to him, her eyes soft with affection. "Oh, I was just thinking about how lucky I am to have you, to have this day with you. You know, Jason, you're more than just my grandson. You're a gift, a reminder that love knows no boundaries, no colors." Jason felt a lump form in his throat. He'd always known how much his grandmother loved him, but hearing her say it like this, in this moment, made his heart swell with emotion. "I love you too, Grandma," he said, his voice thick. "More than you know." As they pulled into Millbrook, the bustling city streets a stark contrast to the quiet lanes of Maplewood, Jason felt a sense of accomplishment wash over him. He'd done it. He'd driven all the way here, with his precious grandmother by his side, safe and sound. Little did he know that this peaceful, joyous morning was about to take a turn he could never have anticipated. As they drove through a quiet neighborhood, looking for a parking spot near the shopping district, neither Jason nor Mrs. Evans noticed the police cruiser that had just turned onto the street behind them. They were laughing at one of Mrs. Evans' jokes, the sound of their shared mirth filling the car, when suddenly the world around them erupted in a cacophony of sirens and flashing lights. Jason's heart leapt into his throat as he looked in the rearview mirror, seeing the police car right behind them, lights blazing. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles turning white. "What's happening?" Mrs. Evans asked, her voice laced with confusion and concern. I don't know," Jason replied, his mind racing. Had he been speeding without realizing it? Had he run a stop sign? With shaking hands, he signaled and pulled over to the side of the road, his heart pounding in his chest. As he put the car in park, he took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. "It's okay, Jason," Mrs. Evans said, reaching over to pat his arm reassuringly. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. We haven't done anything wrong." Jason nodded, grateful for his grandmother's calm presence. But as he watched the police officer approach in the side mirror, a cold feeling of dread settled in the pit of his stomach. Something about this felt wrong, very wrong. And in that moment, as the officer rapped sharply on the driver's side window, Jason's perfect day took a turn that would change his life forever. As Jason's hand reached for the window control, his fingers trembling slightly, the quiet Millbrook neighborhood around them erupted into chaos. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Jason's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, watching as another police cruiser sped past them, its lights flashing urgently. "What on earth is going on?" Mrs. Evans muttered, her brow furrowed with concern. Before Jason could respond, the officer who had pulled them over was at his window, his face a mask of stern authority. "Driver, step out of the vehicle now," he barked, his hand resting ominously on his holstered weapon. Jason's heart raced, his palms sweaty against the steering wheel. "Oh, officer," he stammered. "What's the problem? Did I do something wrong?" The officer's eyes narrowed, his voice sharp and commanding. "I said, step out of the vehicle. Now!" Mrs. Evans leaned forward, her voice calm, but edged with worry. "Officer, please. My grandson is just learning to drive. If he's made a mistake, I'm sure dash." "Ma'am, stay out of this." The officer cut her off, his gaze never leaving Jason. "Young man, this is your last warning. Exit the vehicle with your hands where I can see them." Jason's mind whirled, trying to make sense of the situation. He had followed all the traffic rules, hadn't he? Was it because he was driving in an unfamiliar neighborhood? Or was it? No, he pushed the thought away, not wanting to believe it could be that simple, that cruel. With shaking hands, Jason unbuckled his seatbelt. "Grandma," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "it's going to be okay. Just stay calm, all right?" Mrs. Evans nodded, her face pale with worry. "Be careful, Jason. I'm right here." Jason took a deep breath, then slowly opened the car door. As he stepped out, the cool air hit him like a slap, making him acutely aware of every sensation. The rough asphalt under his feet, the slight breeze ruffling his hair, the pounding of his heart in his chest. "Hands up!" the officer shouted, and Jason complied immediately, raising his trembling hands above his head. It was at that moment that Jason noticed the second police cruiser had turned around and was now parked behind them, its lights still flashing. Another officer emerged, his hand also on his weapon. "What's going on?" Jason asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Please, I haven't done anything wrong." The first officer approached him cautiously, as if Jason were a dangerous criminal rather than a scared teenager. "We received a report of an armed robbery at a convenience store 2 blocks from here," he said, his voice cold and professional. The suspect was described as a young African-American male driving an older model sedan. "You match that description." Jason's blood ran cold. A robbery? Him? It was absurd, unthinkable. He opened his mouth to protest, but before he could speak, the officer continued. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," he ordered. "But I didn't dash," Jason began, only to be cut off. "Now," the officer barked, and Jason, terrified and confused, had no choice but to comply. As he turned, facing his grandmother's car, Jason caught sight of Mrs. Evans' face through the windshield. Her eyes were wide with fear and disbelief. Her hand pressed against the glass as if she could reach out and protect him. The cold metal of handcuffs clicked around Jason's wrists, the sensation so alien and terrifying that he felt his knees go weak. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a mistake, a terrible misunderstanding. "Officer, please," Mrs. Evans' voice called out as she hurriedly exited the car, her usual grace replaced by urgent, jerky movements. "There's been a terrible mistake. My grandson and I just arrived in town. We've been driving for over an hour. He couldn't possibly have been involved in any robbery." The second officer moved to intercept Mrs. Evans, his hand outstretched. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay back. This is an ongoing investigation." "Investigation?" Mrs. Evans' voice rose, a mix of indignation and fear. "The only thing you need to investigate is why you're treating my grandson like a criminal. We were on our way to go shopping, for heaven's sake." Jason stood frozen, the cold metal of the handcuffs biting into his wrists. His mind raced, trying to process what was happening. He had gone from excited new driver to suspected armed robber in a matter of minutes. The absurdity of it all would have been laughable if it wasn't so terrifying. "Grandma," he called out, his voice shaking, "it's okay. I'm sure they'll sort this out. Just stay calm, please." But calm was the last thing on Mrs. Evans' mind. Her usual gentle demeanor had been replaced by a fierce protectiveness that Jason had never seen before. "I will not stay calm while you manhandle my grandson," she snapped at the officers. "He's a high school student, for goodness sake. An honor roll student. He doesn't have a criminal bone in his body." The first officer, who had handcuffed Jason, turned to face Mrs. Evans. His face was a mask of professional detachment, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but we have to follow protocol. Your grandson matches the description of a suspect in an armed robbery." "A description?" Mrs. Evans scoffed. "Let me guess. Young, black, and male? Do you have any idea how many people that could describe? My Jason has never been in trouble a day in his life." As the argument continued, Jason felt a growing sense of panic. He had heard stories about situations like this, stories of misunderstandings that turned tragic, of innocent people who ended up hurt or worse because of snap judgments and racial profiling. He had always thought those stories happened to other people in other places. Not here. Not to him. "Officer," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Please, can I explain? We just got here from Maplewood. I was driving my grandma to go shopping. I have my learner's permit in my wallet. You can check it. Please." The officer turned back to Jason, his expression unreadable. "We'll check your ID back at the station. Right now, you're coming with us for questioning." Jason's heart sank. The station? This was spiraling out of control faster than he could have imagined. He looked at his grandmother, seeing the fear and anger in her eyes, and felt a wave of guilt wash over him. This was supposed to be a fun day out, a chance for him to show off his new driving skills. Instead, it had turned into a nightmare. As the officer began to lead Jason towards the police cruiser, the reality of the situation hit him full force. He was being arrested, Him, Jason Evans, who had never so much as gotten a detention in school. The unfairness of it all made him want to scream, to fight back, to do something. But he knew that would only make things worse. "Wait," Mrs. Evans called out, her voice cracking with emotion. "You can't take him. He's innocent." "Jason, honey, don't worry. I'll call your parents. We'll get this sorted out. Just stay calm, okay?" Jason nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He could feel tears pricking at the corners of his eyes, but he blinked them back furiously. He wouldn't cry. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him break down. As the officer opened the back door of the cruiser, Jason caught sight of movement out of the corner of his eye. People were starting to gather on the sidewalks, drawn by the commotion. Some had their phones out, filming the scene. Jason felt a flush of shame creep up his neck. What would people think when they saw this video? A young black man being arrested, his distraught grandmother pleading his innocence. It was like something out of a news story, except this time, he was living it. "Officer," he said, making one last desperate attempt. "Please, can't we just call my parents? They can vouch for me. I'm telling you, there's been a mistake." The officer's face softened slightly, but his grip on Jason's arm remained firm. "Look, kid, I'm just doing my job. If you're innocent, you've got nothing to worry about. We'll get this sorted out at the station." As Jason was about to be placed in the back of the police car, he heard his grandmother's voice, strong and clear despite the tremor of fear. "Jason, remember what I taught you. Stay calm, be respectful, and know your rights. I'll be right behind you. I promise." Jason nodded, swallowing hard against the lump in his throat. As the car door closed behind him, he caught one last glimpse of his grandmother. She stood tall, her chin raised defiantly, but he could see the tears glistening in her eyes. In that moment, Jason made a silent vow. He would get through this, he would prove his innocence, and he would make his grandmother proud. The interior of the police cruiser was cold and sterile, the plastic seat uncomfortable against Jason's back. The partition between the front and back seats made him feel caged, trapped. As the car pulled away from the curb, Jason craned his neck, trying to catch one last glimpse of his grandmother. He saw her talking animatedly with the second officer, her hands gesturing emphatically. Even in this nightmare situation, the sight of her fighting for him brought a small measure of comfort. As they drove through the streets of Millbrook, Jason's mind raced. How had this happened? 1 minute he was enjoying a drive with his grandmother, feeling proud of his newfound driving skills. The next, he was in the back of a police car, accused of a crime he didn't commit. The unfairness of it all made his chest tight with anger and fear. "Officer," he said, his voice small in the confined space of the car, "I swear I didn't do anything wrong. There's been a mistake." The officer in the passenger seat turned to look at him, his face impassive. "Save it for the station, kid. We'll sort this out there." Jason fell silent, his heart sinking. He thought about his parents back in Maplewood. By now, his grandmother would have called them. He could imagine their reactions, his mother's panic, his father's controlled anger. They would be on their way soon, he was sure. But how long would it take them to get here? And what would happen to him in the meantime? As they neared the police station, Jason slouched down in his seat, wishing he could disappear. What would people think when they saw him? Would they assume he was guilty? Would this follow him forever? Even after the truth came out? The car pulled into the station parking lot, and Jason's stomach churned with anxiety. This was really happening. He was about to be booked for a crime he didn't commit. As the officer opened the car door, Jason took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Remember what Grandma said, he thought. Stay calm. Be respectful. Know your rights. As he was led into the station, Jason couldn't help but notice the stares from the officers inside. Some looked curious, others suspicious. He kept his head high, determined not to show how terrified he felt. "This way," the arresting officer said, guiding Jason towards a desk. "We're going to book you now." "Book me?" Jason's voice cracked. "But I haven't done anything. Please, can I call my parents?" A new officer behind the desk looked up, his eyes moving between Jason and the arresting officer. "What have we got here, Johnson?" "Possible suspect in the convenience store robbery on Elm," Officer Johnson replied. "Matches the description given by the witness." The desk officer raised an eyebrow. This kid? He doesn't look old enough to drive. I have my learner's permit, Jason said quickly. It's in my wallet. If you just check dash. We'll get to that, Officer Johnson cut him off. First, we need to process you. The next few minutes were a blur of humiliation for Jason. He was fingerprinted, his mug shot taken. Each flash of the camera felt like another nail in the coffin of his innocence. As they took his personal belongings, including his wallet and phone, Jason felt utterly helpless. Please, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I need to call my parents. Or my grandmother. She was with me. She can tell you I didn't do anything wrong. The desk officer hesitated, looking at Officer Johnson. Maybe we should dash. I don't care about your protocols. Mrs. Evans' voice rang out, her normally gentle demeanor replaced by fierce determination. My grandson is innocent, and I demand that you listen to me. Officer Johnson, the man who had arrested Jason, stood before Mrs. Evans, his face a mask of professional detachment. But beneath that mask, a flicker of doubt had begun to take root. Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but we have to follow procedure. Your grandson matches the description given by the witness. Mrs. Evans' eyes flashed dangerously. A description? You mean young, black, and male? Do you have any idea how many people they could describe? My Jason has never been in trouble a day in his life. As Mrs. Evans continued her impassioned plea, her fingers flew over her cell phone, sending rapid-fire text messages to everyone she could think of who might be able to help. Jason's parents, already on their way, the pastor of their church, the principal of Jason's high school, even the mayor, with whom she'd served on several community committees. Look, Mrs. Evans said, her voice softening slightly as she appealed to Officer Johnson's humanity. Jason is a good boy. He's an honor roll student. He volunteers at the community center. He was driving me to go shopping. For heaven's sake, please just check his alibi. Call our neighbors in Maplewood. They saw us leave this morning. Officer Johnson hesitated, the doubt in his mind growing stronger. I'll see what I can do, ma'am, but I can't make any promises. As Mrs. Evans continued her one-woman crusade at the front desk, the investigation into the actual robbery was taking an unexpected turn across town. In a rundown apartment complex on the outskirts of Millbrook, Officer Sarah Martinez and her partner, Officer Tom Blake, were responding to a noise complaint. As they approached the apartment in question, a crash followed by muffled cursing caught their attention. Police! Open up! Officer Martinez called out, her hand instinctively moving to her weapon. The door flew open, revealing a young man with wild eyes and disheveled hair. Before either officer could react, he bolted past them, shoving Officer Blake aside in his desperation to escape. Stop! Police! Officer Martinez shouted, breaking into a run. The chase was short but intense. The suspect, clearly not an experienced criminal, made rookie mistakes. He glanced back too often, slowing himself down. He chose obvious hiding spots, making it easy for the officers to track him. And most damning of all, in his panic, he dropped a crucial piece of evidence, a wad of cash still wrapped in the convenience store's distinctive money bands. When they finally cornered him in a dead-end alley, the young man broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm sorry, he cried, sinking to his knees. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I needed the money. My mom's sick, and we can't afford her medication. As Officer Martinez cuffed the suspect, Officer Blake picked up the dropped cash, his eyes widening as he realized what they'd stumbled upon. Sarah, he said, his voice low with disbelief, I think we just solved the convenience store robbery. Back at the station, the atmosphere was tense. Mrs. Evans had been joined by Reverend Michael Thomas, the respected pastor of Maplewood's largest church, and Sandra Cooper, the principal of Jason's high school. Their presence had caused quite a stir, with officers and administrative staff alike stealing glances at the impromptu delegation. Chief, Reverend Thomas was saying, his deep voice resonating with quiet authority, I've known Jason Evans since he was a little boy. He's one of the finest young men in our congregation. There's simply no way he could be involved in something like this. Principal Cooper nodded in agreement. Jason is one of our top students. He's never had so much as a detention. He's the kind of kid who stays after school to help tutor struggling classmates. This has to be a mistake. The chief of police, a man named Robert Anderson, listened to their words with growing concern. He'd been on the force for over 30 years, and his instincts were telling him that something wasn't right about this case. Just as he was about to respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. As he read the text, his eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Well," he said, looking up at the group before him, "it seems we may have had a breakthrough in the case." The next hour was a whirlwind of activity at the Millbrook police station. As officers Martinez and Blake brought in the real robbery suspect, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place with alarming speed. The suspect, a 22-year-old named Eric Thompson, had confessed to the robbery almost immediately. His description matched the one given by the convenience store clerk, but with one crucial difference. Eric was several inches shorter than Jason, a detail that had somehow been overlooked in the initial report. As the truth of the situation became clear, a palpable sense of unease settled over the station. Officer Johnson, who had been so certain of Jason's guilt just hours before, now found himself facing an uncomfortable reality. He'd made a mistake, a big one. "Chief," he said, his voice tight with tension, "I think we need to review the Evans case immediately." Chief Anderson nodded grimly. "I couldn't agree more. Give me everything we have on the boy. And I mean everything." What followed was a deep dive into Jason Evans' background. And with each new piece of information, the officer's shock and dismay grew. "Honor roll student every semester since freshman year," Officer Johnson read aloud, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Active in the school's debate club and math team. Volunteers at the local community center teaching computer skills to seniors." Chief Anderson shook his head, a mix of admiration and regret on his face. "This kid's record is cleaner than half my officers. How the hell did we get this so wrong?" The evidence of Jason's character and achievements continued to pile up. Letters of recommendation from teachers praising his intelligence and work ethic. Certificates of achievement for various academic competitions. Even a local news article featuring Jason's volunteer work, showing him patiently helping an elderly woman navigate a computer. As the reality of their mistakes sank in, the mood in the station shifted dramatically. The earlier bustle of activity was replaced by a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional murmur of disbelief or regret. Officer Johnson sat at his desk, his head in his hands. "Chief," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I really messed up. I saw a young black kid driving an old car, and I jumped to conclusions. I didn't even give him a chance to explain." Chief Anderson placed a comforting hand on Johnson's shoulder. "We all messed up, John, but now we need to focus on making this right." Just then, a commotion at the front desk caught their attention. Mrs. Evans' voice, which had been a constant presence throughout the day, suddenly rose in volume and intensity. "What do you mean you caught someone else? Are you telling me my grandson has been here all this time for nothing?" Chief Anderson took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "Well," he said grimly, "I guess it's time to face the music." Mrs. Evans burst into the chief's office like a force of nature, her eyes blazing with a mixture of relief, anger, and fierce protectiveness. Behind her came Jason's parents, their faces etched with worry and barely contained fury. "Where is my grandson?" Mrs. Evans demanded, her voice ringing with authority. "I want to see him right now." Chief Anderson held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Mrs. Evans, Mr. and Mrs. Evans, please have a seat. We have a lot to discuss." "Discuss?" Jason's father, Michael Evans, spat the word out like it left a bad taste in his mouth. "You've held our son here for hours, accused him of a crime he didn't commit, and now you want to discuss?" "I understand your anger," Chief Anderson said, his voice calm but tinged with regret. "And you have every right to it. We've made a terrible mistake, and I want to personally apologize for the ordeal your family has been put through." The room fell silent for a moment as the weight of his words sank in. Then, like a dam breaking, the emotions that had been held in check for hours came flooding out. "Do you have any idea what you've put my grandson through?" Mrs. Evans' voice cracked with emotion. "He's a child, a good boy who's never been in trouble a day in his life. And you treated him like a common criminal." Jason's mother, Lisa, stepped forward, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We taught Jason to respect the law, to trust the police. How is he supposed to feel safe now? How can he trust the very people who were supposed to protect him? Chief Anderson listened to their words, his face a mask of shame and regret. When they had finished, he spoke softly but firmly. "You're right. We failed your son today. We failed your family. And we failed our community. There's no excuse for what happened, but I promise you, we will do everything in our power to make this right." Just then, there was a knock at the door. Officer Johnson entered, leading a visibly shaken Jason. The moment he saw his family, Jason's composure crumbled. He rushed into his mother's arms, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Oh, baby," Lisa murmured, holding her son tight. "It's okay. We're here now. It's all over." Michael Evans wrapped his arms around both of them, his face a storm of emotions. Over their shoulders, he fixed Chief Anderson with a steely gaze. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Not by a long shot." Mrs. Evans, seeing her grandson safe at last, turned back to Chief Anderson. "I want to know exactly what happened," she demanded. "How did this go so terribly wrong?" For the next hour, Chief Anderson and Officer Johnson explained the series of events that had led to Jason's wrongful arrest. They detailed the initial report, the vague description that had led them to suspect Jason, and the critical errors in judgment that had snowballed into this catastrophe. As they listened, the Evans family's anger began to mix with a growing sense of disbelief and horror. The realization that such a grave injustice could occur so easily, based on nothing more than a vague description and hasty assumptions, was deeply unsettling. "So let me get this straight," Michael Evans said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You arrested my son, a minor, based on a description that could fit half the young black men in this town? You didn't bother to check his alibi or look into his background before throwing him in a cell?" Chief Anderson nodded, his face grave. "You're right, Mr. Evans. We failed to follow proper procedure. We allowed assumptions and, yes, racial bias to cloud our judgment. It's inexcusable, and we will be conducting a full review of our policies and training procedures to ensure this never happens again." Jason, who had been quiet throughout the explanation, finally spoke up. His voice was small, but there was a hint of steel beneath the fear. "What happens now?" he asked. Is my name cleared? Will people know I didn't do anything wrong?" Chief Anderson leaned forward, meeting Jason's eyes directly. "Yes, Jason. We will be issuing a full public statement clearing your name and apologizing for our mistake. We'll also be reaching out to the media to correct any misinformation that may have been reported." Lisa Evans tightened her arm around her son's shoulders. "That's not enough," she said firmly. "My son's reputation has been damaged. His trust in the system has been shattered. How do you plan to make that right?" The room fell silent as the weight of her question hung in the air. It was Mrs. Evans who finally broke the silence, her voice calm but filled with determination. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, fixing Chief Anderson with a steely gaze. "You're going to release my grandson immediately. You're going to issue that public apology, making it crystal clear that Jason was wrongfully arrested and is completely innocent. You're going to implement new training programs to address racial bias in your department. And you're going to work with our community to rebuild the trust that you've broken today." Chief Anderson nodded solemnly. "Yes, ma'am. We will do all of that and more. You have my word." As the family prepared to leave the station, Jason paused at the door. He turned back to Chief Anderson and Officer Johnson, his young face etched with an emotion that no teenager should have to feel, a mix of fear, disillusionment, and a newfound wariness. "I always thought the police were supposed to protect people," he said softly. "I thought if you were innocent, you had nothing to fear. I don't know if I can believe that anymore." His words hung in the air, a damning indictment of the system that had failed him so spectacularly. As Jason walked out of the station, surrounded by his loving family, the officers were left to contemplate the far-reaching consequences of their actions. The damage had been done. An innocent young man's faith in justice had been shaken to its core. A family's sense of security in their community had been shattered. And the delicate balance of trust between the police and the citizens they swore to protect had been severely tested. As the Evans family drove home in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, They knew that their fight was far from over. The journey to heal the wounds inflicted by this injustice, to reclaim Jason's reputation, and to push for meaningful change in their community was just beginning. Back at the station, Chief Anderson slumped in his chair, the weight of the day's events heavy on his shoulders. He looked at Officer Johnson, seeing his own regret and determination mirrored in the younger man's eyes. "We've got a lot of work to do," Chief Anderson said quietly. Officer Johnson nodded, his jaw set with resolve. "Yes, sir. Where do we start?" As the sun set on one of the most tumultuous days in Millbrook's recent history, two parallel journeys began. For the Evans family, it was a journey of healing, of fighting for justice, and of helping Jason reclaim his sense of safety and trust. For the Millbrook Police Department, it was a journey of reform, of confronting uncomfortable truths about bias and prejudice, and of working to rebuild the community's trust. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but in the crucible of this crisis, the seeds of change had been planted. Only time would tell what would grow from this painful experience. But one thing was certain: Millbrook would never be quite the same again. The sun had barely risen over Millbrook when Jason's story exploded across social media. A shaky video, captured by a bystander during his arrest, spread like wildfire. Within hours, #JusticeForJason was trending nationwide. In the Evans household, the phone rang incessantly. Jason sat on the couch, staring blankly at the TV as news anchors dissected his ordeal. Today, we're discussing the shocking arrest of Jason Evans, a 16-year-old honor student wrongfully accused of armed robbery. A news anchor's voice filled the room. Mrs. Evans muted the TV, turning to her grandson. "Jason, honey, you don't have to watch this." Jason shook his head. "I need to know what people are saying, Grandma." Outside, the community's outrage was palpable. Within days, the quiet streets of Millbrook transformed into a sea of protest signs and chanting voices. No justice, no peace. The crowd's cry echoed through the town square. Among the protesters, Reverend Thomas's voice boomed through a megaphone. "We demand accountability. Our children deserve to feel safe in their own community." As the protests grew, so did media attention. Local news vans lined the streets, reporters clamoring for interviews. "Jason, would you like to share your story?" a young reporter asked, her eyes filled with sympathy. Jason hesitated, looking to his parents for guidance. His father nodded encouragingly. I want people to know the truth," Jason said, his voice shaky but determined. "I was just driving my grandma to go shopping. I didn't do anything wrong." The reporter's eyes softened. "And how do you feel about what happened?" Jason took a deep breath. "Scared, angry, confused. I always thought if you didn't do anything wrong, you had nothing to fear from the police. But now, I don't know what to think." As Jason's words aired that evening, they struck a chord with viewers across the nation. Comments flooded social media. "This could have been my son. How many more innocent kids need to suffer before we see real change? Millbrook PD needs to be held accountable." The next day, community leaders gathered at Maplewood Community Center. Principal Cooper stood at the podium, her voice filled with emotion. "Jason Evans is not just a student at our school. He's a bright light in our community. What happened to him is a stark reminder of the work we still need to do to combat racial bias and injustice." As she spoke, Jason sat in the audience, surrounded by his family and friends. The weight of sudden notoriety pressed heavily on his young shoulders. In the days that followed, the Evans family's living room transformed into an impromptu war room. Legal documents covered the coffee table, and the air buzzed with tense discussions. "We need to take legal action," Michael Evans insisted, pacing the room. "What happened to Jason can't be swept under the rug." Lisa nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "Agreed, but we need to consider how this will affect Jason. He's been through so much already." Jason, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "I want to do it. If it can help prevent this from happening to someone else, then it's worth it." The family turned to Jason, surprise and pride mingling on their faces. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" Mrs. Evans asked gently. "It won't be easy. There will be a lot of attention, a lot of questions." Jason nodded, his jaw set with resolve. "I'm sure, Grandma." I need to do this. With Jason's decision made, the family engaged a prominent civil rights attorney, Sarah Goldstein. Her reputation for fighting racial injustice preceded her. The Millbrook Police Department violated Jason's constitutional rights, Sarah explained during their first meeting. We're going to file a lawsuit for wrongful arrest and racial profiling. As the legal wheels began to turn, Jason faced a different battle at home. Nightmares plagued his sleep, filled with flashing lights and cold handcuffs. During the day, he jumped at sudden noises and eyed passing police cars with fear. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again, Jason confided to his grandmother one afternoon. Every time I see a cop, my heart starts racing. Mrs. Evans pulled him into a tight hug. Oh, sweetheart, it's okay to feel scared. What happened to you was traumatic. But remember, you're not alone in this. We're all here for you. The family rallied around Jason, creating a support system that never wavered. They found a therapist specializing in trauma, helping Jason process his emotions and fears. At school, Jason's friends formed a protective circle around him. They walked him to classes, sat with him at lunch, and fiercely defended him against any whispers or stares. "You okay, man?" his best friend Marcus asked one day as they walked home. "You've been pretty quiet lately." Jason shrugged. "I don't know. Sometimes it feels like everyone's watching me, waiting for me to break down or something." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, I get that. But hey, we got you back. Always." The support extended beyond Jason's immediate circle. Community members left encouraging notes in the Evans mailbox. Local businesses put up "We Stand with Jason" signs in their windows. The outpouring of love was overwhelming. Yet, despite the support, the incident left its mark on Jason. He grew more reserved, more cautious. The carefree teenager who had excitedly set out for a day of shopping with his grandmother seemed like a distant memory. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, Lisa noticed Jason pushing his food around his plate. "You need to eat, honey," she said gently. "Keep your strength up." Jason sighed. "I'm just not hungry." "Mom, do you think things will ever go back to normal?" The table fell silent, the weight of his question hanging in the air. Michael reached out, squeezing his son's shoulder. "Normal might look a little different now, son, but we'll get through this together. And who knows? Maybe we can help make things better for other kids like you." Jason nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Weeks turned into months as the legal battle unfolded. Finally, on a crisp autumn morning, the Evans family gathered in the Millbrook Town Hall for a press conference. Chief Anderson stood at the podium, his face etched with remorse. "On behalf of the Millbrook Police Department, I want to offer our deepest apologies to Jason Evans and his family. Our actions that day were inexcusable and stemmed from implicit biases that have no place in law enforcement." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "We are implementing comprehensive racial sensitivity training for all officers. Additionally, the officers involved in Jason's wrongful arrest have been suspended pending further disciplinary action." As Chief Anderson stepped away, Jason approached the podium. The room fell silent. All eyes on the young man who had become the face of a movement. "What happened to me was wrong," Jason began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "But I don't want it to define me. I want it to be a catalyst for change." He looked out at the sea of faces, drawing strength from his family's encouraging smiles. "I'm going to work with the police department and community leaders to create programs that bridge the gap between law enforcement and young people of color. We need to build trust and understanding on both sides." A ripple of applause swept through the room, growing into a thunderous ovation. Jason's words had struck a chord, offering hope in the wake of injustice. In the months that followed, Jason threw himself into his advocacy work. He spoke at schools, community centers, and even a statewide conference on racial justice. "It's not about pointing fingers or assigning blame," Jason explained to a group of wide-eyed middle schoolers. "It's about recognizing our biases and working to overcome them. It's about seeing each other as human beings first." His efforts didn't go unnoticed. Local news outlets ran features on Jason's work, dubbing him Millbrook's young changemaker. One evening, as Jason sat on the porch swing with his grandmother, she turned to him with pride shining in her eyes. You know, Jason, I always knew you were destined for great things. But watching you turn this painful experience into something positive, well, it takes my breath away. Jason smiled, leaning into her embrace. I couldn't have done it without you, Grandma. Without all of you. As the sun set over Millbrook, casting a warm glow across the neighborhood, there was a sense of hope in the air. The road ahead was long, the work far from over. But in the aftermath of injustice, a community had come together. Led by a young man who refused to be defined by one terrible day, they were taking steps towards a more just and understanding future. Jason's story had begun with a wrongful arrest, but it wouldn't end there. Instead, it would be remembered as the spark that ignited change, the moment a community decided to confront its biases and work towards a better tomorrow. As night fell, Jason looked out at the quiet street, a mix of emotions swirling in his chest. There was still fear, still anger at what had happened. But alongside those darker feelings, something else had taken root: determination. Determination to make a difference, to turn his pain into purpose. Ready for your big day tomorrow? Mrs. Evans asked, referring to Jason's scheduled meeting with the mayor to discuss youth outreach programs. Jason nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. Yeah, Grandma, I think I am. And as the porch swing gently rocked, grandmother and grandson sat in comfortable silence, looking towards a future they were helping to shape. One conversation, one program, one changed mind at a time. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees lining Maplewood's main street, scattering golden leaves across the sidewalk. Jason Evans, now 17, walked with purpose, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He'd grown taller over the past year, his shoulders broader, but it was the quiet confidence in his stride that truly marked the change. As he approached the community center, a familiar voice called out, "Hey, Jason, ready for the big day?" Jason turned to see Marcus jogging up beside him, grinning widely. "As ready as I'll ever be," Jason replied, a mix of excitement and nervousness in his voice. Today marked the launch of Bridge the Gap, a program Jason had spent months developing with the Millbrook Police Department and community leaders. Its goal was to foster understanding and trust between local youth and law enforcement. Inside the community center, a buzz of activity greeted them. Volunteers bustled about, setting up chairs and hanging banners. Officer Johnson, looking slightly out of place in his casual clothes rather than his uniform, approached Jason with an outstretched hand. "Jason, good to see you," he said, his voice warm but tinged with the awkwardness that still lingered between them. "Everything looks great. You've done an amazing job putting this together." Jason shook his hand, meeting the officer's eyes. "Thanks, Officer Johnson. I appreciate your support in making this happen." As they talked through last-minute details, Jason couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. The memory of his wrongful arrest still stung, but it had become a driving force rather than a paralyzing fear. The sound of the door opening drew Jason's attention. His family walked in, his parents, grandmother, and little sister Zoe. Mrs. Evans immediately enveloped him in a hug. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so proud of you," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Jason hugged her back tightly. "Thanks, Grandma. I couldn't have done any of this without you." As the room filled with community members, police officers, and local youth, Jason took a deep breath. It was time to begin. Jason stepped up to the podium, surveying the diverse crowd before him. Familiar faces from school sat alongside police officers, community leaders, and curious residents. The air thrummed with anticipation. "Good afternoon, everyone," Jason began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "Thank you all for coming to the launch of Bridge the Gap. A year ago, I never could have imagined standing here today. I was just a kid who wanted to go shopping with his grandmother." A ripple of knowing murmurs swept through the audience. What happened to me that day shook my faith in the system meant to protect us. But it also opened my eyes to the work we need to do, all of us, to build understanding and trust in our community. As Jason spoke, he saw nods of agreement, some eyes glistening with tears, others set with determination. Bridge the Gap isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It's about creating spaces for honest conversations, for learning from each other, and for growing together. It's about seeing the humanity in each other, beyond uniforms or stereotypes. He went on to outline the program's initiatives: weekly dialogue sessions between youth and police officers, community service projects they would work on together, and a mentorship program pairing officers with local teenagers. This is just the beginning, Jason concluded. The real work starts now, with each of us committing to open our minds, to listen, and to be the change we want to see in our community. As applause filled the room, Jason caught his grandmother's eye. She nodded, a proud smile illuminating her face. The event transitioned into a meet and greet, with attendees mingling, sharing refreshments, and signing up for various program activities. Jason found himself in conversation after conversation, his earlier nervousness replaced by passionate engagement. "I never thought I'd say this," a young girl told him, glancing at the officer she'd been chatting with, "but I actually feel like they might listen to us." Across the room, Officer Johnson was deep in discussion with a group of teenagers. "I want to understand your perspectives," he was saying. "Help me see the world through your eyes." As the event wound down, Chief Anderson approached Jason. "You've started something remarkable here, Jason," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Your courage and vision. Well, you're teaching us all a valuable lesson." Jason nodded, accepting the compliment. "Thank you, Chief. But this is just the first step. We have a long way to go." In the weeks that followed, Bridge the Gap faced its share of challenges. Some community members remained skeptical, their trust too deeply broken to mend quickly. A few officers grumbled about sensitivity training and pandering. But slowly, steadily, progress emerged. One crisp Saturday morning, Jason arrived at the local park to find a group of officers and teenagers working side by side, planting trees as part of their first community service project. "Hey, Jason," called out Malik, a sophomore Jason had mentored. "Check it out. Officer Rodriguez here can't tell a shovel from a rake." Officer Rodriguez laughed good-naturedly. "Hey, I'm learning. You try digging holes in this uniform." The easy banter, the shared laughter, it was a small thing, but it made Jason's heart swell with hope. Not every interaction was so smooth, of course. During one dialogue session, tensions flared as a group of students shared their experiences of racial profiling. "You don't know what it's like," one boy said, his voice cracking with emotion. "To be afraid every time you see a police car. To wonder if today's the day you'll be stopped for no reason." The officers in the room shifted uncomfortably, but to Jason's relief, they listened. They asked questions. They started to understand. "I never realized," Officer Johnson admitted later. "We're taught to look for suspicious behavior, but maybe we need to examine what we consider suspicious in the first place." It was moments like these that kept Jason going, even when the work felt overwhelming. There were nights when the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his young shoulders, when doubts crept in. "Am I really making a difference?" he asked his grandmother one evening, slumped on the porch swing. Mrs. Evans wrapped an arm around him. "Oh, honey, you're doing more than you know. Change doesn't happen overnight, but every conversation, every mind opened, that's a step forward." As months passed, the program grew. More youth signed up for mentorship. Officers began attending school events, not as security, but as engaged community members. The us versus them mentality began to crack, replaced by a growing sense of shared purpose. Jason's efforts didn't go unnoticed. He was invited to speak at conferences, sharing Millbrook's story and the Bridge the Gap model with other communities. His inbox filled with messages from kids around the country, inspired by his advocacy. "Your story gave me courage," one email read. "I reported a bad experience with the police in my town. They're starting an investigation. Thank you for showing me that my voice matters." As the one-year anniversary of Bridge the Gap approached, Jason found himself back in the chief's office at the Millbrook police station. This time, however, the atmosphere was markedly different. "Jason," Chief Anderson said, leaning forward in his chair, "I want to thank you. The changes you've inspired in this department, in this community, they're remarkable." Jason nodded, accepting the praise with a maturity beyond his years. "Thank you, Chief. But I didn't do it alone. Everyone in this community, including your officers, they all chose to be part of the change." The chief smiled. "That's true, and that's why I wanted to talk to you today. We're implementing a new youth advisory board for the department, and we'd like you to be its first chairperson. Jason's eyes widened in surprise. Me? But I'll be heading to college next year. I know, the chief replied. But you can help us set it up, train the next generation of leaders. Your perspective, your experience, they're invaluable. As Jason left the station, his mind whirling with plans and possibilities, he nearly bumped into a familiar face. Oh, excuse me, Jason? It was Officer Johnson, looking surprised but pleased to see him. Officer Johnson, Jason greeted him, a small smile on his face. The officer shifted, a look of determination crossing his features. Jason, I've been wanting to say this for a while now. I'm sorry, truly sorry for what happened that day, for my part in it. I know words aren't enough, but I want you to know that you've changed me. Changed how I approach my job, how I see the people I'm meant to protect. Jason felt a weight he hadn't even realized he was carrying lift from his shoulders. Thank you, he said softly. That means a lot. As they parted ways, Jason felt a sense of completion, of coming full circle. The incident that had once filled him with fear and anger had become a catalyst for real, meaningful change. Walking home, Jason's phone buzzed with a text from his grandmother. Dinner's ready, sweetheart. Dad's firing up the grill to celebrate your big news. Jason smiled, picking up his pace. As he rounded the corner onto his street, he saw his little sister Zoe playing hopscotch on the sidewalk with a group of neighborhood kids. Among them was Officer Rodriguez's daughter, the two girls laughing as they hopped and skipped together. The sight filled Jason with warmth. This was what it was all about, building a community where everyone felt safe, valued, and understood. As he walked up his driveway, the smell of barbecue wafting through the air, Jason paused for a moment. He looked back at the street where, a year ago, his life had changed forever. The memory no longer filled him with dread. Instead, he felt a sense of purpose, of hope. The work wasn't done. There would always be more bridges to build, more gaps to close. But standing there, watching the sun set over Millbrook, Jason knew that every step, every conversation, every small victory was worth it. His grandmother's voice called from the backyard, "Jason, honey, come on back. Everyone's waiting." With a smile, Jason headed towards the voices of his family and friends. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. But for now, he was exactly where he needed to be, surrounded by love, celebrating how far they'd come, and looking forward to the journey ahead. As he joined his family in the backyard, Mrs. Evans pulled him into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you, Jason," she whispered. "You've turned something painful into a force for good. You're changing the world, one step at a time." Jason hugged her back, feeling the truth of her words settle in his heart. He had faced injustice and chosen not to be defined by it, but to redefine it. In doing so, he had not only reclaimed his own narrative but had helped an entire community write a new chapter. As the stars began to twinkle overhead and laughter filled the air, Jason knew that while the past couldn't be changed, the future was full of promise. And he was ready to meet it head-on, armed with compassion, determination, and the unwavering support of his community. The end of this chapter was just the beginning of a lifelong journey, one of advocacy, understanding, and hope. And Jason Evans was ready for every step of it. Jason Matthews' life changed in ways he never imagined, and the ripple effect of that day's events reached far beyond his small community, touching the lives of everyone who heard his story. If you were inspired by Jason's journey, make sure to subscribe for more stories of resilience and justice. And before you go, let us know, how would you have reacted if you were in Jason's shoes? We'd love to hear your thoughts.